Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Hey, it's our history unit. I love history, especially when we talk about things that I can relate to. And in day one of our history unit, we're going to be talking about some mail order catalogs that Tom and I used to have when we were growing up. And both of us have ordered things from this catalog. Mine was an experience with Sears Roebuck catalog. And Sears is still in business, but the catalog went defunct or went out of business. They no longer make it back in 1993. I had to check and see when it happened. I remember when I saw that news, I was so sad because the Sears catalog was huge. And you could just look at that catalog for hours and hours. I ordered things from it, as I said. The last thing I ever ordered was a guitar from the Sears catalog. So we're going to talk about mail order. Online shopping, all of our listeners are familiar with that because it's what most of us do these days is shop online. But in the good old days, we had mail order. And actually, there's still companies out there. For example, if you go on an airplane, in the pocket with the magazines will be a mail order catalog that you can call up and order something, or even tell the stewardess or the hostess that you want to order something. But we still have catalogs. We just don't have these huge catalogs we're going to be talking about that existed before there were even department stores.
Of course, we're talking about ordering things that you can't find locally in a local store. And, of course, we're talking about the history of mail order. And nowadays, of course, we have online shopping, but they are related. And we're going to talk about how they're related and how mail order and online shopping came about. And, of course, there are revolutions in home delivery. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's read through the entire contents of today's lesson and talk about mail order.
These days, it's simplicity itself to order something from Amazon, PC Home, or a dozen other websites. But getting products sent to your residence predates the convenience of the internet. Before that, there was mail order. Mail order catalogs contain descriptions of products and their prices. They existed in a small way prior to the 1870s, but before then, they were mostly utilized by specialist companies. Then, Aaron Montgomery Ward realized he could make a lot of money by selling things to rural communities. Stores in these areas only stocked a limited range of goods, and prices were high. With mail order, however, Ward could sell directly to consumers. His company also offered payment on delivery. Customers could send back anything they didn't like. Armed with the slogan, "Satisfaction guaranteed or your money back," Ward began making money hand over fist. Ward's catalog soon inspired others, including the wildly successful Sears Roebuck catalog. The two publications not only improved life for millions of Americans, but also benefited the country as a whole. Road networks were expanded, and more rural areas were given their own post offices to facilitate the flow of goods from urban manufacturing centers to the countryside. This was the golden age of mail order, and almost anything could be bought from catalogs. Incredibly, this included houses. Sears Roebuck would deliver the materials for a DIY 5-room bungalow for less than $900, roughly $18,000 today. Like all things, however, this golden age passed. As car ownership and the number of department stores increased, people preferred to shop in person. Only with the arrival of the internet era has the practice of ordering goods from afar arisen again.
All right, everybody, it's time for us to discuss today's lesson. Again, the topic is mail order and online shopping, revolutions in home delivery. Okay, so of course, this is talking about being able to order things online or through a catalog when you can't find these things in your local stores. Now, these days, it's simplicity itself to order something from Amazon, PC Home, or a dozen other websites. So here, simplicity is when something is simple. That's the noun form, just talking about the concept of things being simple. Basically, this means it's really simple to order something from Amazon, PC Home, etc., etc. So its simplicity itself means simplicity is the meaning here, and indeed, this is the definition of simplicity because you can order so easily online from these various websites.
We'll often say, oh, people like the simplicity of the instructions, or people like the simplicity of this particular camera. Some things are hard to use, or some instructions are very hard to understand. So hopefully, if you're out there manufacturing things, you make your instructions very simple. Or people might not want to buy your product. So you're looking for simplicity to make your customers happy. So simplicity to me also is a brand name of a pattern that my mom would buy and make clothes from. So simplicity means something else to me too.
Yeah, my mom had those patterns as well. Yeah.
Simplicity, Butterick, those things. I know one of the two went out of business. Anyway, we're not talking about sewing today. We're talking about mail order and online shopping. Now, if you're talking about a revolution, you're talking about something that changes entirely. So these were some revolutions in home delivery. Now, we know back in the day when people, especially in the 1800s, people were living sometimes kind of in the wild, it seemed like. We talk about it being the countryside or rural, but they were really out there where there were no stores sometimes. Or if they had a store, you could buy simple things like flour and eggs. They probably grew their own food back then, but they couldn't find anything that was very sophisticated or that was produced in a factory. So this is how this whole idea of a mail order catalog began. So as Tom said, today we've got things like Amazon PC Home, I use all the time, and Momo. I order from Momo.
I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, very convenient. I like convenience because I work a lot. I just I don't have time to go shopping all the time. And it's sometimes hard for foreigners in Taiwan to figure out where a particular item is sold. It's not always easy, guys, because the way you have department stores and even stores in general, you often don't have the same items in the store that we expect. So shopping online has given me a chance to find the things I need or want without spending hours in a store wandering around.
Although I don't like to order clothes online because I'm never sure about the size. I'm fairly large, so even if I order an XXL shirt online, it still may be too small for me. So yeah, I still like to go to the store to try things on first, especially with shoes. But this of course, reminds me of when I was a kid. Of course, I'm from a small town, and we had a small bookstore there and a small record store. But if you really wanted to get good stuff, you had to go far away, like we had to drive to the Twin Cities or Mankato or Sioux Falls or places like that to find a big record store or a big bookstore or buy some cool clothes. And we always look forward to those trips. But of course, it was a lot easier to have stuff sent to your residence. And yes, getting products sent to your residence predates the convenience of the internet. So your residence, of course, is where you live. But, there's a lot of people out there who think the internet has been around forever, but there was a time when there was no internet. And if you wanted something sent to your house, you couldn't use the internet. You had to find some other way. And there was a way that was called mail order.
If something predates something else, it just means it existed or happened earlier than something else. It could be a person or a thing. We could say that, let's see, the horse and buggy predates cars. So people didn't have cars back in the 1800s and early 1900s. They really didn't have many people that had heard of them. They hadn't been invented in the 1800s. So if something predates something, it comes before. So yeah, getting products sent to your home or residence predates the convenience of the internet. Nowadays we have the internet. And before that, there was mail order. Mail order catalogs contain descriptions of products and their prices. I think most of our listeners know what a catalog is. I did want to mention catalog can be spelled two ways. In American English, it's often spelled C-A-T-A-L-O-G, probably because we're very lazy. But you can use either spelling. They're both correct and acceptable, whether you're in America, Canada, Great Britain, they're all great. So mail order catalogs is what we're talking about. They existed in a small way prior or before the 1870s. If you use prior to, you'll need that to before the date you're talking about. But if you use before, you don't. So you could say they existed in a small way before the 1870s. But if you use prior to, you're going to have to use that to. Or previous, you can also use a synonym previous to, but I would say prior to the 1870s. But here it just means, again, existing or arranged before something else, or before the present situation. So mail order catalogs did exist. They were around, but they were very, very hard to find. They weren't something that people all knew about.
Right, and they, of course, were primarily used by specialist companies. They were mostly utilized or mostly used by specialist companies. So if it's a specialist, or if you're a specialist, that means you have a very special skill in a certain area. Maybe you specialize in eye surgery or something like that. If you're an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist, you're a specialist. But in this particular case, we're talking about companies that produce goods for very special niches in the market, maybe for horse and buggy supplies or something like that. You could buy a buggy whip or the wheels or the chairs or things like that, but that's the only product they sold, or those were the only kinds of products they sold, just stuff for horse buggies and wagons and stuff like that. They were used by specialist companies, not really for broad uses for lots of different people.
Okay, this is probably a good time to stop, take a break, and listen to our Chinese teacher. Then we'll be back.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。如果我们今天要谈把商品直接送到你家的这件事情啊，其实很久很久以前有所谓的邮购 mail order。 当然现在的年轻人呢是不晓得邮购是什么东西啦。我们今天呢跟明天就要带大家来谈一谈邮购到网购这样子的一个状况。好，我们看一下文章当中的第一段。第一段在第二句的地方，我们特别注意一下第二个单字的 getting products sent to your residence， 这个 get 的用法，在这里的 get 是一个实义动词哦。这个 get 的实义动词，如果后面它的受词加上的是受词被如何如何，那么被如何如何，比如说在这里的产品被运送到你的住所，那么直接加上 PP 就可以了。因为要提醒大家的是，实义动词如果是要某人去做一件事情 get someone to do something， 那么这个后面受词要搭配 to do something， 才有受词主动做一件事情这样子的意思。那么接下来呢，我们就看到第二段啦。其实邮购啊，它就是透过邮购的目录，然后呢，目录有产品的描述，还有价格。所以在1870年之前是有一点点规模很小，但主要都是专业的公司在使用，不是我们一般人在用的。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about mail order and online shopping, revolutions in home delivery. In day 1 of our history unit, we're going to be focusing more on the mail order side of the revolution in home delivery. And then in our next program, we'll talk more about online shopping, in particular Amazon, and how they work. So when we left you, we were talking about how mail order catalogs were around prior to or before the 1870s, but they were mostly used by specialist companies, smaller companies, needing something very particular, not just for general items that you could then find later on in these mail order catalogs. Well, there is a gentleman named Aaron Montgomery Ward who then had a great idea to make a lot of money. If you're an American, you know his last 2 names here, Montgomery Ward. I didn't know his name was Aaron. I just knew Montgomery Ward was a family. But Aaron Montgomery Ward, he realized one day he could make a ton of money by selling things to rural communities. Even Tom would describe his own town growing up as a rural community. There just weren't a lot of stores. There weren't a lot of restaurants to choose from, probably a couple. But back then, a lot of people were living in rural communities. Unless you lived in a big city like Chicago or New York, you were pretty much living in a rural community. So he realized that he could sell things that weren't available to people living in these rural communities or out in the countryside and make a lot of money.
Yeah, if you lived in an urban area like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, etc., you could find these things pretty easily in department stores and stuff like that. But if you lived in, say, Rippey, Iowa, or Esterville, Iowa, or places like that, you had to travel quite far to get some things. So, of course, Montgomery Ward came out with this catalog, and stores in these areas only stocked a limited range of goods. I'm talking about stores in rural communities, small towns in Nebraska, South Dakota, etc., etc. They only had a limited range of goods and prices were high. So with mail order, however, Ward could sell directly to consumers. I guess he was the first one to do that, but later on we had J.C. Penney's and Sears, and there were some other ones as well. And yes, indeed, if you wanted to get special kinds of items, you could order through those catalogs. You had to wait a few days, but it was worth it.
So this guy, Aaron Montgomery Ward, would sell directly to consumers. His company also offered payment on delivery. Nowadays, we say POD. If you see those initials, it means payment on delivery. I know I ordered some things recently through Shopee, and I didn't have to pay until my box arrived at a 7-Eleven or a convenience store where I went to pick it up. That's POD. There's also something called COD. If you see it, it means cash on delivery, which is also used, but not as much anymore because we all have credit cards these days or can transfer payment through our bank accounts.
Or whatever. Yeah,
right. So he offered a great deal that customers could actually send back anything they didn't like. And his slogan, if you're armed with something, it just means you've got something that protects you or is just perfect for what you need. Armed with the slogan, satisfaction guaranteed or your money back. I think a lot of companies stole this slogan from him. Years later, we still hear this slogan being used, satisfaction guaranteed or your money back. We hear that on infomercials on TV a lot. So Ward began making money hand over fist. This is a phrase or idiom that we use. If you make money hand over fist, it's just there's so much money you can't count it. So he was getting rich.
He had more money than he knew what to do with, and Ward's catalog soon inspired others, including the wildly successful Sears Roebuck catalog. We just called it the Sears catalog for short, and the two publications not only improved life for millions of Americans, but also benefited the country as a whole. So these are catalogs, of course, and they're publications. They are printed, and they're bound together, and they're sent out. So they're publications publications, the Sears catalog, the Ward's catalog, the Penny's catalog, etc. And they improved life for lots of people living in rural areas. But, of course, it also improved the country as well because everybody had these things and everybody could improve their lives and contribute more to society.
Now, publication is one of our vocab words, guys. It's countable here. Just means a book, a magazine, things that are actually published. You could say, my work has been published in major publications around the world. But we also use it in an uncountable way when we talk about information that's printed in a book or a magazine. You could say, there's a publication of the company's annual results, the publication of something. But here we're using it in a countable way. It actually refers to the magazines, catalogs, books that were printed. So, yeah, it improved life for millions of Americans, but it also benefited the country as a whole. Why? Because to deliver these items in the catalog, you had to have roads that connected and worked. So these road networks were expanded, and rural areas were given their own post offices, which didn't happen before, to facilitate the flow of goods from urban manufacturing centers to the countryside. Facilitate, Tom, what does that mean?
To make things easier. So, of course, I've studied Spanish before. The word for easy in Spanish is fácil. So facilitate means to make something easier. So, yes, indeed, these little town people, these hicks from small towns in America.
What's a hick, Tom?
Just kind of a country bumpkin, a person from the country. They wanted all this stuff, and they said, hey, how are we going to get this stuff to them?
Yeah.
We need to build more roads. So that's what they did. It facilitated the flow of goods from urban manufacturing centers to the countryside. And this was the golden age of mail order, and almost anything could be bought from catalogs. That is true. If you couldn't find it locally, you could just order it through the catalog, and voila, it showed up at your doorstep. Now, incredibly, this included houses. Sears Roebuck would deliver the materials for a DIY 5-room bungalow for less than $900, which is the equivalent of $18,000 today. I heard about that before, but I don't know anybody who ever ordered that.
Yeah, a bungalow isn't a very strong or sturdy house that lasts for 100 years. You see a lot of bungalows if you go on vacation and you're staying in sort of a jungle area. Or maybe even, I think you had a bungalow in Indonesia, didn't you, Tom?
The Philippines, actually.
The Philippines.
But yeah, that's popular if you travel to tropical countries like Indonesia or the Philippines or Thailand. You might often stay in a bungalow by the beach. And, of course, you can go to beach parties and stuff like that and have the time of your life. So it was a very small structure that you could buy from Sears. Now, like all things, however, this golden age passed. That's true. The catalogs all kind of disappeared. And, of course, my parents didn't have them after a certain time. They had different catalogs for specialized clothes like L.L. Bean and Land's End. And what was the other one? Eddie Bauer, I think.
Eddie Bauer, yeah. I still order from those guys.
I think they're still around, but of course, everybody orders online these days. And as car ownership and the number of department stores increased, people preferred to shop in person. True, you can go to Walmart and get anything you want if you're in the United States. Only with the arrival of the internet era has the practice of ordering goods from afar arisen again. So mail order kind of died out, and now we have the internet and ordering online. And ordering goods from afar or from faraway places has arisen again. It has come back.
Yeah, arisen is actually the past participle of the verb to arise, which means, if a problem or a difficult situation arises, it begins to happen. So it just means something's beginning to happen. Sometimes in everyday English, if we're just talking to each other, people will say that a problem or difficult situation has come up. Oh, something's come up. You'll hear us say that quite often, but it's good for you to know what arise means. It just means to happen. Again, arise is the verb. Past tense is arose. Past participle is arisen. And if it comes from afar, it just means it's a long distance away. So that's what we have to tell you about mail order catalogs. In our next program, we're going to be talking about Amazon. But first, guys, before we sign off, we're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher.
那么后来就有一个商人 Aaron Montgomery Ward， 他就想到说，他可以透过卖东西直接卖给乡村社区，就可以赚钱啦。我们来看到第二段的第3句 By selling things。在英文当中，如果你是要透过做一个动作来完成一件事情的话，通常都会用 by doing something， 就是借由某一种方法。好，那么可是就是有一个这个状况啊，为什么这个状况会被这个 Mr. Ward 想到呢？当时啊，乡村社区的商店只有卖一些种类很有限的商品，而且价格都很高。但是如果是透过邮购的话 ，Mr. Ward 就可以直接向消费者零售东西了。我们接下来就直接看第二段的第5句。我们刚刚说透过邮购 ，Word 就可以如何如何。这个透过在这里看到的又不是 by 哦。我们看第5句，一开始的介系词用的是 with 后面也可以加上工具，它本身也是介系词，不过通常都是用 with 加名词，表示用什么样工具的意思。好，而且他的公司呢还提供货到付款，很特别哦。看一下同样第二段的第6句，这个英文当中的货到付款就叫做 POD， 出现在哪里呢？破折号之前有一个 Payment on Delivery， 在商业英文当中的 POD 就是所谓的货到付款，而且破折号还特别说，如果不满意的话，消费者可以退回任何他们不喜欢的东西。所以破折号之后呢，其实有一个关系词被省略的限定用法关系子句，也就是 anything 可以画起来，它是先行词。那么后面的 they 到句尾就是所谓限定用法的关系子句。关代的 that 是被省略的，这时的关代一定会用 that， 因为先行词 anything 是一个特别强调的字眼，任何一个，而且是一个不定的代名词，所以关系词呢一定是 that， 然后被省略。好，那么接着呢，还有一个很特别的地方 ，Word 它打了一个口号，就是保证满意，否则退款。这个很特别。不过在同样第二段的第7句，我们出现了一个分词构句。我们一开始看到一个 PP 叫做 armed， 其实这个 armed with 它通常前面都有一个 be 动词，重点呢 be armed with 本来有配有带着什么什么武器啊，或者是装备的意思。那么这里的分词构句省略的是 because Ward was 这3个字。那么我们把连接词的 because 删掉，后面的 be 动词 was 变成 being。可是在句子简化的时候 being 没有任何的意义，因为 be 动词本来就是一个功能性的动词，所以它也被删掉。那留下来的这个 word 主词呢，当然就跟逗点之后的 word 主词同样都是重复的，所以 word 直接也被删掉。换句话说，这个分词构句就只剩下一个 PP armed with the slogan。 那么 Word 邮购目录呢就很快的启发别人啦，然后其他的邮购商也都加入了。那么当时就是因为这样子常常会有寄送的这个需求，所以整个道路的网络也扩展了，很多乡村地区也有邮局了。不过到现在黄金时代就过去啦，因为汽车百货公司的数量也都增加，所以大家还是蛮愿意亲自去购物的。一直到网络时代的来临之后啊，从远处订购商品的这种做法才再次出现。不过我们要看一下最后一段，这里有一个倒装句哦。这个倒装为什么会有倒装呢？因为啊，其实它是把随着 with 放在句首，也就是说呢，这一句整个是把时间副词放在句首。好，那这个句子到底原本是什么？其实主词是接近中间的地方 the practice of ordering goods 这一种所谓的订购货物的做法，动词是 has arisen again 再一次的开始，然后时间副词是前面的 only 到 the internet era 这个地方。如果我们要强调时间副词，就可以把时间副词上句首，那么就会形成了倒装句。这个倒装就是看起来像疑问句一样，假设动词是 has arisen， 那么我们就会把助动词的 has 放在主词的前面，看起来很像疑问句。所以最后这一句是 only 加上时间副词放在句首的倒装，要特别注意哦。我们明天还会看货物寄送到府的流程，明天见咯，我是安娜，拜拜。
That brings us to the end of our lesson for today. We spent most of today talking about mail order, and next time we're going to talk about ordering online, which you're all pretty much familiar with. So let's talk about the history of that next time. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.